And very briefly, just give you an overview of what our session is today. It will last about an hour and a half long. We've done already the welcome, and then we'll turn it over to our speaker. I'll introduce you to her in a moment. Then we'll stop for questions and answers related to Anna's talk. And then we'll have a group discussion about the UNESCO recommendations. And that will be kind of seeded by some individual responses from Iryna Kuchma, Paolo Budroni, and Bianca Amaro. So without further ado, I'd like to, I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, who is Anna Peršić, and now I just have to get her up here. She's the Senior Program Specialist, Division of Science Policy and Capacity Building, Natural Science Sector, United Nations at UNESCO. And she's also has been one of the lead people at UNESCO who's really been supporting this process of consultation and the UNESCO efforts to really develop and adopt these recommendations. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Anna Peršić and say thank you very much again, Anna, for agreeing to give us a presentation at COAR.
Thank you very much, Kathleen, and it's a real pleasure to be here, also because members of COAR and COAR in general was really a very good partner in our journey towards this draft recommendation. So we're very happy to be able to present to you where we are at this point, and also brainstorm a little bit with you how we can take this further and how we can continue working together in promoting open science really across the world. So I'm going to make a relatively short presentation, and Kathleen, if I'm kind of going too long, please don't hesitate to stop me, and I can wrap it up quickly so that we have time also to for questions and to talk. So just I'm just going to share my screen and very quickly just present the kind of the rationale for the recommendation, and then the process, and then where we are in the process, and also what we are expecting to do in the future. So just to put it in the context of COVID, because I think for open science, really COVID was kind of an eye-opener for a lot of people, and particularly on the UNESCO side, we saw a really huge interest in science, in scientific information, in scientists, in scientific collaborations, in science systems more broadly. And we see now more and more demands coming to us really from countries who are trying to understand how they need to revise or reform their science, technology, innovation system to be able to respond not only to global health crisis like the one that hit us all in the past couple of years, but in general, looking into all the different challenges that we have. How can science be better integrated and in the responses of countries to the different challenges that we face? So I think COVID really made a lot of people understand that timely and free access to scientific data, publication, and information, or at least access that is available and affordable, is extremely important. International scientific collaborations, transdisciplinary scientific collaborations, and sharing of information at all different levels, also something that really was shown by the COVID crisis, is very important. This dialogue between science, policy, and society is also something that needs to be improved in the future, also to be able to kind of fight misinformation and misguidance that can be given also, including from parts of the scientific community. And then really this importance of the human right to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress. We have seen this with this call for universal access to vaccines, with inequities that we are currently facing with regards to access to vaccines, there is a human right to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress, and there really needs to be a little bit more effort from different stakeholders to ensure that this right is fulfilled. And so in this context, this idea of open science, which of course has been around for a while in different communities, but it really did come out very, very strongly. And we are more and more seeing open science and its potential to increase the quality of science, and also to make the entire scientific process more transparent, more collaborative, and more inclusive. From the UNESCO perspective, I think what is really important is that we see open science as a potential tool to bridge the science technology innovation gaps between countries and also within countries, and also as a tool to, as I said, fulfill the human right to science. And we, you know, I don't know how many of you are aware, but the United Nations has this Sustainable Development Goals and the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda until 2030. And we have seen more and more calls for open science, also in the context of helping countries achieve those goals more quickly and accelerate the progress towards the achievement of these goals. So really kind of a good moment for open science worldwide, and with different stakeholders, including policymakers. However, we've also seen that there is a proliferation of different initiatives. There are things happening in different parts of the world. There are different actors involved. But for the moment, we don't have a global international policy framework for open science. We don't have a common definition of what open science is. We don't really have a shared set of values and principles, nor some actions as kind of a framework actions towards open science that would be really the tool that we would need to kind of fulfill all of these different potentials of open science. And so even before the pandemic, so in November 2019, the UNESCO member states, and we have 193 member states, at their last general conference, they have decided that UNESCO should be the body of the United Nations to lead this process, consultative process, towards a UNESCO recommendation on open science. And recommendations, UNESCO recommendations, are legal instruments. They're not binding like conventions, but they are legal instruments. They are supposed to influence legislations and initiatives in different countries towards a certain goal. And in this case, it would be towards open science. So for the past 2 years, we've more or less, we have been involved in a really broad consultation process with different stakeholders and in different regions, because I think one of the most important things that we got as instructions from the member states is to ensure that whatever recommendation is drafted, it really has to reflect the perspectives from different parts of the world. So it cannot be seen as something coming from one part of the world, but really bringing together the perspective of different parts of the world. So we had a global consultation, a global survey. We've also asked some written inputs. We did get some inputs also from COAR, which was very well noted and integrated in the recommendation. We had a lot of regional consultations across Africa, Arab states, Latin America, Caribbean, Asia Pacific, Eastern, Western Europe, North America. We also had a very good Open Science Advisory Committee, which was appointed by our Director General. And also some of your members were part of it. And then there was a Global Open Science Partnership, which is still kind of open for kind of joining the movement and this consultative process towards the recommendation. We also held a lot of thematic and stakeholders consultations and got inputs from young scientists, citizen science representatives, academies, science unions, libraries, open access platforms, data organizations, UN system, indigenous peoples. We really tried to be as inclusive as possible in drafting this recommendation and trying to also bring the different communities together, because we've seen that, as I said, the movement of open science has been around for a while, but we saw that there is an open access community, open data community, kind of citizen science community, which is also somewhere there. Open infrastructures are there, but very rarely do all these things come together. And I think one of the important features of this process was to try to bring all of these different parts of open science together. And then we had different iterations of the draft text of the recommendation based on the comments received, based on the inputs received, based on the comments from member states also received. And in May, we had a very interesting intergovernmental meeting of technical and legal experts representing member states. And also observers were present as well, kind of also supporting member states in the negotiation and discussion of the final draft text. I don't know if maybe I can share later the version of the text, the final draft text that has been endorsed by this intergovernmental committee based on the consultations and on the previous reiterations of the draft text. And that is now put forward again to the General Conference, so to the 193 member states who in November are meeting, discussing the draft text, and hopefully will be adopting this as an international standard setting instrument for open science. So as I said, we had over 100 countries represented, observers participating as well. It was kind of a half hybrid meeting, very, very interactive, with a lot of countries very keen on reaching consensus and moving open science forward. So what we have at the moment in the draft recommendation, which I think is relevant to mention, is that we managed to come up with this global definition of open science as like an inclusive construct which increases scientific collaboration and sharing of information, makes scientific knowledge openly available, accessible, and usable for everyone, and then also opens the processes of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation, and communication to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. So really is like the combination of these three, let's say, pillars: collaborations, access to knowledge, as well as opening up to society, with the idea that yes, open science means opening science to scientists and also opening it up to society at large. We've also had a lot of discussions on like what are these key pillars of open science, or the key elements. And in the current draft, we have the open scientific knowledge, which kind of brings together scientific publications, open access, open data, open hardware, software, and source code. We have open science infrastructures, both virtual and physical, engagement of societal actors through citizen and participatory science, volunteering, crowdsourcing, crowdfunding activities. And then we also have this open dialogue with other knowledge systems, so openness to other knowledge systems, in particular traditional indigenous knowledge systems. And we've really had very, very interesting conversations with indigenous peoples in particular, to understand how they would want to engage and what they would expect from engaging in the open science, under the open science principles. In terms of values and principles, we have quality and integrity, collective benefit, equity and fairness, diversity and inclusiveness for core values, and then transparency, scrutiny, equality of opportunities, respect, responsibility, collaboration, flexibility, sustainability as different principles. And it may be, sounds, oh, but we know these are the values and principles, but it's really important to put them down and also to kind of define them a little bit, just again, to make sure that everybody who reads it knows exactly what we're talking about and that they all agree with this particular values and principles. So when we do put open science into practice, it always has to be with this in the background as values and principles for open science actions. And then, as I said, there is a series of actions which are really interesting in particular for governments, but of course also for other actors. Going from promotion of common understanding, enabling the policy, creating an enabling policy environment, investing in human resources, capacity building, infrastructures and services, the promotion of international collaboration, innovative approaches, and broad fostering of a culture of open science, looking, of course, also at aligning the incentives for open science at the policy level. So under each of these different areas of actions, there's a series of actions which are recommended for the member states. And the idea with these recommendations is that every 4 years, the countries have to report back. Those countries who adopt the recommendation, they have to report back to UNESCO and say, where are they with regards to the different actions that have been put in the recommendation. As I said, in terms of the process, we had this consultative process. There was a series of what we call statutory meetings, this meeting, intergovernmental meeting, different reiterations of the text. And now we are at the level where really we have a draft text. It has been approved by the Special Committee of Technical and Legal Experts, and we are really hoping that the member states will adopt it in November this year here in Paris. But I think as we look forward, in a hope that this is going to be adopted and that we will have to start implementing the moment countries do adopt it. Of course, we are also aware that there is a lot of different challenges and issues that have to be dealt with while we look into the recommendation of the implementation of the recommendation, but also when we look into implementation of open science practices beyond the recommendation itself. So the critical importance of maintaining quality with the principles of open science, the importance of adequate infrastructures, including reliable internet connectivity, alignment of incentives, revision of criteria for evaluation of scientific excellence and scientific careers, in particular for young researchers, the links between intellectual property rights, open science, these links with indigenous knowledge systems, the openness, the importance of international solidarity and really looking into open science as science that goes across borders and across continents. The risk potential of commercial monopolization of research data with the call for these long-term sustainable not-for-profit infrastructures and services that are supporting open science. So I think a lot of these challenges resonate also with the COAR community, because some of them are, of course, at the core of what you are doing as well. And as I said, there is this question of monitoring open science and monitoring the implementation of the recommendation. And we really are hoping that we will be able to work with the different partners to understand what exactly do we want to monitor, and how do we want to do it, and how do we combine both quantitative and qualitative indicators by which we can see what's the progress and the impact of open science on scientists and the society. And maybe just zooming into, excuse me, I think I missed one. Zooming into what could be the potential inputs also of COAR. As I said, the inputs, your inputs were very, very important when we were drafting the recommendation. But there is a lot to be done, of course, in terms of capacity development, knowledge sharing about open science, about open access repositories, about how do we use them, what are the terms, what are the conditions, what are the different practices, what are the guidelines, best practices, lessons learned, and in particular sharing that with countries from the South and with scientists and other actors from developing countries, because it really is critical, because open science relies also a lot on connectivity, on internet, on all of these, digital infrastructures. If those are not in place, you are basically completely out. So it's extremely important to take that into account, because if you don't, instead of bridging the knowledge gaps and reducing them, the risk is that you might actually just increase them and kind of increase the access to information to those who already have it, instead of the other way around, increase the access to those who don't have access so far. So we are also hoping that once the recommendation is adopted, and we hope really that what is in there is really useful for different actors like open access repositories and your community to kind of push for the right way of doing open science and the right way of expanding possibly repositories and other infrastructures, etc., platforms for sharing of knowledge, which is at the same time yes, accessible but also equitable, just, and it meets all the criteria that are specified in the recommendation. So I think I'm going to stop here, Kathleen. I hope this is I didn't go too much over time, and that I'm very happy to respond to any questions or share any more information that you would like me to do.
No, that was perfect, Anna. Thank you so much. And I really do think these are groundbreaking. This is a groundbreaking framework that will really advance open science once they already are, influencing the dialogue in our community and in many other communities. So congratulations to you at UNESCO for the great work. So there's a couple of comments in the chat that I'm going to read out in a minute. I'm also just speaking to the audience. If you have a comment or question, please put it in the chat or raise your hand and you can ask, you can speak directly to Anna. But I guess one of the questions I had before we move on to the others in the chat is, do you anticipate any challenges or problems with ratification of the recommendations in November?
So for the moment, we don't have any indication that the countries are unhappy with the current text or that there might be any problems. Of course, I mean, it's 193 countries have to come together and have to say yes. So it's never a done deal until it's really adopted. But for the moment, as I said, we kind of are really hopeful that the recommendation will be adopted by consensus, that it will not be, opened or rediscussed at the November conference. Also, because I said the intergovernmental meeting, which really looked into the text in detail and had like 4 days of very long sessions of negotiations. This is where really, and there were more than 100 countries, so it really was very good attendance. There were experts, there were legal experts, there were technical experts. We had, some countries who came really with a very broad set of experts that they came with. So I'm really hopeful that this will be adopted. But as I said, until it's done, we still have to wait. Yeah.
I mean, I guess my concern is the publishers and the commercial, publishers, and that they're not particularly pleased maybe with these recommendations because, again, they focus a lot on not-for-profit infrastructure and moving away maybe from taking away some of the power and the influence of those actors in the system. So I hope, who knows if they're working behind the scenes, lobbying.
Well, we will see that. But I think in general, there is this push for science as a global public good. And, it's not, it will happen in one way or another. There is more and more initiatives that go in that direction. And there is also more and more publishers that are trying to see what are the different ways in which they can also change their business model to embrace this type of approach to scientific production, etc. But and we are absolutely we understand that this is not something that's going to happen from one day to another. We also understand that there is a huge difference between the different countries and in different communities, different for different actors. Very huge, very big difference also with regards to different scientific disciplines. So the recommendations are kind of broad enough and flexible enough to accommodate all of this diversity, and also the flexibility in the different approaches the different actors can take, having in mind the principles and values, and then just moving forward as much as they can with open science practices. So I think this is where the movement is going. I think there was a first push from the science community, then from the librarians, the repositories, the kind of open infrastructures. Now the governments are taking it on board too. So it's we are hoping that, you know, it shouldn't be a top-down approach or you know, a completely bottom-up is very difficult, because you do need some kind of buy-in from governments, of course, particularly when it comes to policies about open science. But it is important that everybody feels that this is their movement and that it's reflected, that their needs and challenges are reflected. So there's going to have to be a discussion with the publishers as well. They're part of the system. We have to understand how to increase the dialogue with them.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Okay, so I'm going to, there's a couple of comments and some questions here that we'll go through, and then we can turn it over. Once we've responded to these, we can turn it over to our other colleagues who have prepared a response. So Paulo Budroni, who will actually talk later, has said, says, a comment concerning the lessons learned. We also realized that there's a huge distance between the world of science and the majority of people. Society is largely disconnected from science, and a huge part of society believes that the content of social networks is trustworthy. So I think that's a good point, and we're seeing it play out now at the COVID-19.
We had actually a very big discussion about science communication in general, with the idea that the science communication part is particularly important in the open science context, because there is more and more information that is out there. And so there is more and more actual responsibility on those who put the information out there, that it is the right information and presented in the right way. And as I said, there is still quality information, and there is integrity in the science that we are communicating. But yes, the efforts in science communication have to definitely be increased. And one of the things that I liked is, for example, there are references in the recommendation to the role of science museums and science centers and some of these other, you know, places and tools that we have to kind of build the science culture more broadly. And it's really something that needs to be invested in much more.
Yeah, absolutely. So our next question is from Michael Witt. He says, thanks for the great presentation. You mentioned the relevance of the recommendations for COAR, but I was wondering if you have further insights on what individual repositories can do to help foster and realize this framework, in particular as it relates to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I personally, we are not at the stage yet that we have, you know, guidelines for everybody or no. But what we do want to do is to have a conversation around these issues and see what are the ideas coming from repositories themselves. Again, what are some initiatives which are interesting to have a look at, expand, support? How can the communities, repositories individually, and also as a how to say in association, how they can move forward and help in the implementation. I think just like with the development of the recommendation, where we didn't put out a text for everybody to comment on, we really tried to get inputs from the entire community, and then we based on that drafted the text. Here it's the same thing. Now the text is out there, and we're trying to see who can contribute to what and in what sense, and we will help in building that dialogue and the platform for bringing different actors together. So if there is anybody who wants to take a lead on some of these issues, I think in the implementation we will come together to our different partners and see how they can best contribute, including through brainstorming, and maybe for each community set some priorities or 5 to 10 biggest challenges or biggest opportunities, and we kind of try to work across those. This is something really that we are open to suggestions and have no intention of having something rigid to then impose, on the different partners. And again, as UNESCO Secretariat, we are not even experts in many of these issues. So we really rely on you and practitioners in particular to tell us, listen, this is how it should be done, and these are the biggest challenges also.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. And I think as you and I spoke about a couple of weeks ago when we talked, I think there's definitely work that COAR can do to help, define the role in more detail of repositories, and also the institutions that host repositories, which often are libraries. Mm-hmm. So it's like the framework is at a very high level, and then we can fill in the information here so that it's more easy for governments and other stakeholders to understand what are the tools and organizations that can help to advance or support.
Absolutely, and also libraries, and you know that better than me, in the developing countries have a really important role to play, and they're really reaching out to try to understand, how do they have to again reform, what do they have to do, what do they need, how can they come together, how can they share some platforms, how can they share some of the tools. I think it will be really, really interesting, again, to whenever we think about what you can do, is to think in terms of North and South and doing things together for the open science, and particularly for the implementation of the recommendation.
Yeah, did somebody want to say something? I completely agree with you, and I think one of the things I've heard, especially from the libraries in developing countries, is that they're often overlooked when policymakers start to adopt these kind of open science policies. So again, like being able to prescribe that in more detail and have that and share that with the community could be very helpful in those environments. So there's another comment here by Jenny Barber. It was amazingly well-managed meeting when the recommendations were discussed. I was part of the Australian delegation. Are there any specific materials we can use ahead of the November meeting to promote it with our countries?
That's a great question. I think our promotional tool is the recommendation. So for the moment, we are kind of, particularly with the countries, is to say this is a draft text. This is why it's important. Because we have to wait for the adoption, then we will have, communication materials around the recommendation. It's very difficult to send out now or launch some of these communication materials that can be, we're preparing like videos, we are preparing a social media campaign to really promote the recommendation, but we have to wait for it to be adopted first, of course. But for the moment, just raising awareness about the recommendation with your different communities, with the different governments. I think that's the most important thing at this moment. And yesterday we've had a meeting on the margins of the General Assembly, also to kind of raise awareness about the recommendation. And we had really, really good feedback from delegations in New York. Because, even if it's the same member states, sometimes just because they sit in different capitals, they don't necessarily know what is going on. And they were really thrilled to hear about the recommendation. So I really do encourage everyone to take the draft text of the recommendation and just kind of promote it within your communities and your networks, saying it's going to be adopted in November. What can we do right after? And we're kind of encouraging the countries when they do come in November, and they usually make their statements, etc. We're trying to encourage them to say, okay, so what are you going to do already? Like, let's think about it. It's something that where the implementation has to start right away. So if same for you and your community, if there is something that you would like to announce as an additional thing that you want to do, or something that you want to flag out, it would be good. It would be good to let us know, and maybe we can also flag it during the meeting.
Thanks, Anna. Eloy Rodriguez has a question here for you. Can the current text still be modified before the General Assembly in November? No. I mean, the only place where it could be modified, but as I said, I hope that we will not reopen the discussions is at the General Assembly. For the moment, the text has been submitted to the General Conference of UNESCO. For the moment, there is no other mechanism to open it and renegotiate or change the draft text. Okay, thanks. Gerald Bailey says, thanks for the excellent presentation. I think it will be important to, excuse me, it will be important to protect the true meaning of open science from commercial interests. Absolutely. I mean, it's, I think for all of us involved in open science, it's a challenge, and we have to make sure that open means open. And again, that it is according to the values and principles that we now have decided as a global community. This is what open science should mean. So yeah, it's going to be a challenge as well, of course. Indeed. And I think the distributed approach that COAR, the vision that we have for a very distributed approach is one way of helping avoid that kind of platformatization of open science that we potentially could end up in. So there's a comment here by Alan Koo. He says, we have prepared the 10th China Open Access Week, 26th to 27th. Can COAR support us, a speaker for the guidelines? Yes, Alan, we absolutely can. We'd be happy to do that. And then there's just a few thanks for the excellent presentation. Gultekin Gordal says, did you reach to the UNESCO representative in countries related to the recommendations? I'm not sure if that's clear. Gultekin, do you want to explain your question? It's not quite.
Yeah, I can explain, Kathleen. Lots of representative in UNESCO in countries. I'm wondering, they sent this report,
Absolutely.
the recommendation to them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's very important. They have a communication with the government, so it will be easy to distribute the whole country.
Yeah. So the recommendation was sent out to all the governments, to all the ministers of science.
Very nice, Anna.
That was the one, but you're right. I mean, UNESCO has what we call national commissions. This is basically like a UNESCO representation in every country. And they are pretty important in making this connection between UNESCO action and the governments of individual countries. And of course, we have delegations of the countries in UNESCO in Paris, but then we also have representation kind of UNESCO in the different countries, and they have also received the draft recommendation. So on that side, I think we did our job. But it's always good, you will always find somebody who kind of didn't hear about it. So again, awareness raising is always good to do.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks. And so I guess the final question here, and then I'll move on to our colleagues who will give a short response, is it's kind of a question or a comment. The question is probably more from Inga. The question is probably more to raise awareness in our governments before the GA. So can we do some work to raise awareness of the value and the benefits of these recommendations before November, and would that be helpful? For
me, yes. I mean, absolutely. If there is, if I don't know, some of you are part of some committees or in other way interact with the governments on the issues of open science, and if they're not aware. As I said, it's always good to talk about the recommendation and encourage the support for the recommendation in November. And then once it's adopted, it's kind of even more important to make sure that they are aware of it, and that, you know, it's kind of the framework within which they should also be working. So to kind of push for the implementation as well. But again, as I said, I mean, really different countries come from very different starting points. The recommendation has a lot of different proposed actions, and it's very, very comprehensive, and we understand that not all the countries will be able to do everything right away in the way it's written in the recommendation. So it's just the transition period that we also have to take into account. I really like what is being done now with some of these policy workshops where different countries bring the different stakeholders of open science together, starting to map their own national open science ecosystem, and then trying to figure out from there, how do we create some kind of open science roadmap or strategy or action plan or policy. So I think these are some of the very interesting initiatives and work done by LIPS, and so other is really, really very, very interesting in that regard.
Thanks, Anna. And I think that's a great segue to our first responder, Iryna Kuchma, who I believe was on the expert committee for the recommendations, but I know that Iryna is also working with the Ukraine government to see how those recommendations can be implemented in the context of Ukraine. So Iryna, can I invite you to say a few words or a few comments?
Thanks a lot, Kathleen, and thanks a lot, Anna. You asked, or you said that you hope that recommendations will be useful, and I can already confirm that they are already useful, because for us they are an excellent conversation starter when we have national open science policy discussions. For example, with Alan Koo, we organized a meeting in China where we looked at the state of open science infrastructures in China, and what's recommended in the recommendations and try to map that. And that was really useful. And another example is a National Open Science workshop in Uganda, where our first keynote was on UNESCO draft recommendation, and where Uganda is now an audit of needs to fulfill what will be required in those recommendations. And that other examples that Kathleen mentioned, we're working with the Ministry of Education and Science in Ukraine now on the National Open Science Action Plan, which is part of Open Government initiative in Ukraine. And recommendations is of course a framework for us for writing this National Action Plan. So that saves a lot of time, because we don't need to spend a lot of time discussing. We just start from what's in the recommendation. But we're facing a couple of challenges, and I don't know whether you or others have some suggestions how to solve them. So one challenge is that we really want to adopt all UNESCO definitions, but unfortunately they're very long, and Ukrainian language is twice longer than English. So if we really adopt them word by word, half of the action plan will be definitions. So we sort of decided that we'll go with European Parliament definitions, which are much more concise for now, but the ministry is still looking into, I don't know, maybe having an appendix with those definitions according to UNESCO recommendations, and the ministry is also translating those recommendations into Ukrainian language. And another challenge, and you already mentioned that, Anna, is that they are high-level actions, and what we need to do, we need to operationalize them in our national context, and we really need to do a lot in Ukraine. So we ended up with quite a lengthy action plan that is required to actually implement all of them in the national setting, and really want to go with all of them. We don't want to, I don't know, say we'll start with open access to publications and we'll have fair data or reproducible research later. So that's another challenge that we're facing, but we are sort of almost done with about 10 bullet points for each of the actions. And just want to thank you once again for all the work you did, and yeah, I hope our open science future will be brighter soon.
Thanks, Iryna. And I'd just like to encourage everyone to continue putting your comments or questions in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand. So when we see your questions, your comments, we'll stop and continue to read them out to everyone. And so thanks, Iryna. And I think it's great to see that already the recommendations are being used, you know, to guide the adoption of certain policies and plans. Alessandra?
Yes, I was wondering if Anna, if you can tell something about us, about open education in this important and really, I would say, milestone document that you're working around. Thank you.
Kathleen, do you want me to respond now?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Okay. So first to Iryna, it's really great to hear indeed that the recommendation is already being used, and I do realize that definitions are very, very long, but this is what happens when you put, you know, 190 countries together and all the different actors. Of course, you can always have them, you refer to them as per the UNESCO recommendation, and you put them somewhere in the annex. And I think the idea is just to make sure that the essence of these definitions stays if anybody kind of uses them in a different way also as well. And going back now to the question about open education. So we have a whole part on open educational resources in particular. which we see as a fundamental part of open science. And it's also complementary to another recommendation that UNESCO adopted 2 years ago, and that was the recommendation on open educational resources. So the two are now kind of coming together because it is extremely important. And again, we had many different countries highlighting the importance of A, education, and then B, open education, and in the context also of open educational resources. So you will find a lot of references to that in the recommendation as well.
Great. Thanks, Anna. Now I'd like to call on Paulo Budroni to provide his comments. Paulo, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Kathleen. So I have three main issues arising from the lecture of the recommendations. And I would like to talk about the first one. The first question is referring to the point 3.3 of the recommendations. So my question is, what could be the role of infrastructures in the implementation of the recommendations? I mean, this is important or of relevance because it's referring to rapid reconfiguration of infrastructures, as we have experienced during the last 18 months.
Did you want to make all of your questions?
Yes, if you
want,
I can also post them in the chat if you want. The second question is, what could be the role or function of the different constitutional laws in the implementation of open science, such as stated in the point 5 of the recommendations? This question is referring to the fact that in the majority of European constitutions, science and teaching of science is free or are free. And I see some overlappings between the recommendations and what is already stated in the constitutional laws. And the third question is a tricky one. We experienced during the pandemic that we have to react very quickly. And it was possible to create vaccines in such a rapid way because we worked in virtual research environments. So we need, as researchers, virtual researchers environment, and also we need the virtual researcher. So the virtual researcher as a subject is already acting, is yet acting, and how does it fit now the role of the virtual research into the recommendations of open science of UNESCO? Thanks.
Okay, so all the three questions were difficult ones, and I don't have the answers to all of them. We can just, you know, share some inputs and insights, and we can continue a conversation. With regards to the role of infrastructures, and as you will see in different parts of the recommendation, I think for us and also for the different member states, infrastructures are critical. And we're talking, as I said, both digital infrastructures and also physical infrastructures. And it was really the member states who insisted on expanding the whole part on infrastructures, which was actually much shorter in the first versions, to insist on the fact that, you know, open science goes hand in hand with the needed infrastructures, and it has to be something. If you start talking about open science, you immediately talk about infrastructures as well. So it's something that is really an integral part of open science and open science practices. Having said that, what was also important in the negotiations and discussions that we have is that many infrastructures for open science can be shared. So the idea is, how do you share? Shared by whom, owned by whom, who has access, who provides access, who provides data, etc. So I think there is infrastructure also comes with a lot of the equity and equality and access questions. And we tried in the recommendation to kind of tease out some of the important characteristics that those infrastructures should have to ensure that open science really is done in a proper way. With regards to the different national legislations and how they're going to fit into the open science recommendation or the other way around, the premise of the recommendation usually is that it is done within the context of national law, right? So it's the idea would be that if needed, you would make some changes in your national legislation or create new legislations that would be aligned with the recommendation. This is the hope, right, with the recommendation. However, as I said, they're not legally binding, and it's not like if a country adopts, they're going to have to change all of their laws so to fit right away with all the recommendations, with all the actions in the recommendation. So. As international law, I mean, in this context of recommendations, there has to be some kind of alignment of the context of national legislation and then the recommendation. And with regards to the virtual researcher, again, this is a little bit what we said before. I mean, open science, a lot is virtual and a lot is digital. So when I don't know if we ever talked about a virtual researcher in our context, in our negotiations or in the process, but we did talk about the digitalization of science, and in that context, the importance of access to, and the importance of connectivity, access to internet, access to all the broadband, etc. Everything that allows for open science to be conducted also in the virtual world. So I think, I'm not sure if that was where your question was going, but I think from our side, this is, I mean, from my side, this is a little bit what I can respond.
Thank you. Thanks, Anna. Paolo, do you have any response to that? Or?
Yes, just a comment, very short one. So we have experienced that the infrastructures we have used the last 18 months, they were not conceived for what we are using them. They allowed us as a society to work like we did before, but we are using EduRoam for other purposes, for example, when we do it, it was conceived. We're using the NRN networks for other purposes. I think we should look at this development closer. Thank you very much.
Now, that's a very good point. And if there is anything in particular that you would like to share as to the challenges or the risks that can be associated with using the infrastructures for what they were not initially conceived for, it would be good to share so that we can have a look at it. And on the other hand, I think, I mean, as a society, as humans, we just adapt, right? So there can be some good things coming out of the fact that we can adapt, and that now we are talking, on Zoom. And 2 years ago, maybe 2 of us knew about Zoom. So it's also, how do you take advantage of some of these things, and how do you adapt them? But as you rightly point out, in the right way, because that's the most important thing, I suppose.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to one of the things you mentioned, because it's one of the challenges that we have at COAR, which is trying to build essentially a global interconnected infrastructure for repositories. And there are always going to be those inequalities. The repositories are better funded in the north, yet we really need to support. So rather than centralizing things in the places where they are most well funded, our approach is really to try to strengthen those infrastructures and repositories in the regions where there's less funding. But I think the reality is that there will always be that kind of inequality across the global north and the global south, or wealthy countries and poor countries. And so I wondered if you had any thoughts around how we can address those gaps, what the community can do to, again, focus on strengthening infrastructures in places where there's a need for greater resources.
Again, I think it's on one hand, the countries themselves need to decide that there should be a priority for investment in science, for investment in infrastructures, science infrastructures, and those now include repositories and other infrastructures which are used by and for open science. At the same time, at the regional level, governments also can come together and decide that that should be the priority. So on one hand, and again, the recommendation puts that up front, is that it is also the responsibility of the governments themselves to invest and make sure that they are investing more into infrastructures. But at the same time, there has to be this exchange of information and knowledge, particularly from the north to the south and the other way around, so that development of one side doesn't actually diminish the development on the other side. And I think, again, that's also another one of the cultural shifts that just has to happen, right? You maybe you get a grant, you invest a part on your national level, but then the rest, maybe you can also see how you can support something else. Like, it has to become, this international solidarity that we are talking about has to become something that we do as part of the actions that we undertake. So yes, we will do something here, and then let's see what are the partners. How can we partner with developing countries or countries from other regions, etc. So that would kind of be the idea, some of the ideas that are promoted in the recommendation for now. But it is also really a question of investment and funding and research grants, etc. But also how are the research grants distributed? There is a lot of ways in which or through which one can really also push for a greater international collaboration and solidarity, which would then also cover some of the issues that you were talking about.
Yeah, and I think that also speaks to something that Leslie Chan often mentions, which is the design of those infrastructures that are often designed in the north. So they work, with the they work with the northern context, but not always in the southern context. So that's another thing I think we can try to have more co-design, bringing in people from the global south. So there's another question here in the chat from Maseret Asefa. How the recommendations address the issue of intellectual property rights, cultures, and awareness of researchers?
Well, there are a few how to say paragraphs, elements in the recommendation that talk a little bit about the intellectual property rights. The idea is that the open science needs to function within the framework also of the current intellectual property regimes. And there are different ways for the open science and intellectual property to kind of live together, and we've seen it in different cases. So, open licensing is something that is promoted throughout the recommendation, public domain, and other tools that exist to promote openness and also fit within the current intellectual property framework. awareness of researchers and the diversity of cultures. I think with regards to the diversity of cultures, the whole part, there are two parts. There is a lot of emphasis on diversity and inclusiveness in general, and that also includes cultural diversity. And then also there is specifically this part that really looks into, other knowledge systems stemming from other cultures, stemming from other ways of collecting information and knowledge and developing knowledge, etc. So, of course, it's not the key objective of this recommendation, but it definitely, makes reference to it as well.
Thanks. Thanks, Anna. Okay, there's another question from Najla in the chat, but I think we're going to go to Bianca now, and then I'll take Najla's question after Bianca makes her comments. Bianca, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for everyone. And Anna, it was a fantastic presentation, and we are waiting with many positive expectations to reinforce the actions we are trying to carry out in Latin America. This document will drive us the creation of open science laws in the region. And I must say that we are waiting for this document because we are some kind of treating the political instance that we will have to adapt to the recommendations. It will be very important to us. It's very important to say that Latin America does not have any funds, regional funds. We work with our national budgets, and sometimes it is a little bit difficult. And I would say that we have a lot of challenges. We have to create the laws, we have to create our infrastructures, but I think that these recommendations will be fantastic for us to show to our political levels that we will have to adopt these recommendations. And so we have a lot of challenges, a lot of challenges. We have a problem with connections, as everybody knows, but we are doing a very important work at La Referencia Network that is working with the countries of Latin America, and we are trying to implement all the actions related with the recommendations. And I would say that I only expect to be approved as soon as possible as a legal recommendation to speak with our countries and to improve our actions and to have a global framework to say, well, we need to do it because all the world is doing it. And I think that it's the voice, the most important voice that we will have. And so I don't have any question for you, Anna. I think that we have a lot of challenges, and we are working mainly in the creation of our infrastructures and to have a capacitation of the humans that we will work or that is working with open science. And we are doing it together, all the countries of Latin America. And so I think that it's very important to act collectively to achieve our desires, our things that we have to do. And so I think that it's very important to say here that we at La Referencia and Red Clara, we are working together to create a regional infrastructure to address all the questions related with open science. So for us, I think that for the countries of the South, I think that I could say it, their recommendations will be essential for us to show to our governments and see, oh, if you want to be international, to have international science, we will have to create, to adopt, to disseminate the open science in our countries. I have to say thank you for UNESCO doing it, and I'm quite sure that it will be approved, and we are expecting it as soon as possible, at November, I know, but we are waiting with a lot of expectations. Well, Anna, thank you. Your presentation was fantastic. And as someone said at the chat, the material that you have presented, it could be very important to us to convince our governments. And if you could put it for everyone, it will be fantastic. No, I have no more to say, and thank you, Kathleen, for the invitation. And Latin America will be working hardly to adapt the countries to these recommendations. Thank you.
That's really great. Yeah. Sorry, Kathleen, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, would you like to respond, Anna?
No, it's really, really good. And you know, Bianca, in general, a lot of the things coming from Latin America on open science are very advanced and very, very good. And there is a lot of people who had no idea. And I think what these consultations, the global consultations did, is to put the spotlight on some of the great things you guys have been doing for a very long time. And I love this idea of South-South collaborations. And we have more and more countries actually coming to us from, Asia or Africa and saying, yeah, but, let's see a little bit what, Latin America is doing, because there are more affinities there. And it feels like this South-South collaboration and then the North-South collaboration is something that's going to be really critical for the future. But you have a very long history, and you have developed, between the repositories, between the different initiatives, etc. It's really extremely rich. And open access has been striving in Latin America for some time now, right? So there is a lot to learn also, and I think what we will be coming to you also is to share some of these lessons and see, particularly for the countries from the South, if there is something that they can take from there to work with as well. But thank you for the support and for all the good work, and I again hope that the recommendation will be adopted indeed, and then you will be able to use it even more. But I have to say that really the how do you call it, the Latin America member states were very, very supportive of the recommendations. So I think that you already have a lot of governments on your side as well.
And I see that Luis has his hand up and would like to make a comment. Go ahead, Luis.
Yes, thank you, Kathleen, and thank you very much, Anna, for the very good presentation. I was just wanting to subscribe and support the Bianca words about the relevance of this recommendation from UNESCO. It has been very important for us to be able to speak up about the relevance of open science. And we have been, fighting for many, many years to make governments and regional agencies to understand the relevance of infrastructures in terms of providing the capacity to develop open science. So as Bianca mentioned, you have all our support in the region. We have been working to promote this as much as possible. I think that in terms of the General Assembly, we will be coordinating actions to be present before the meeting with some, public statements regarding the relevance of open science and the kind of things this can provide to the region. And I think that this view that we are working together with La Referencia, other organizations like Escalac, all of them with many, many years working in Latin America, helping to promote those capacities, is needed to be expanded to the rest of the world, because it's a work of connecting dots that are already in place, but need to be connected. No? In the case, for example, you need a high performance computing capacity to be able to use data. You need the repositories, you need the connectivity, you need many things. And those things are being developed since many years ago, but you need to connect the dots in each of the continents between them. So we are working on that. I'm happy to be able to participate in this meeting. And I would like to confirm that we are working together to support this point of view and to help as much as possible to make it a reality and supported by infrastructures. And we are very happy to be considered in the content of the document when UNESCO mentioned the National Research and Education Networks as something that is important for this ecosystem. So thank you very, very much for the presentation and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Luis. So we're just got another 6 minutes left, and I'd like to make sure we don't miss Najla's message in the chat. But Irina, you have your hand up, and I think you have a comment related to the current discussion. So maybe you can go ahead, and then I'll read Najla's message.
No, we can start with Najla's, and then if we have time, I'll say my comment.
Okay, Anna, so this is another a question for you. She says, thanks for the great presentation and hard work. How do you see these recommendations supporting making open science practices at the institutional level a reality? Could we align parts of the recommendations to local policies and even help those who have yet no policies, help them develop them? Or do you see these recommendations more targeted at the national or ministerial level?
I think there is a range of different recommendations that one can take at different levels. And of course, with regards to the open science, it happens at different levels, at the institutional level, as well as the national level or international level. So again, the recommendations are broad enough that one can take them and adapt them to the different to these different levels or the different actors. And the idea really is, yes, for the different policies that need to be developed, that we provide as much as possible the assistance. And when I say we, it doesn't necessarily mean UNESCO, it means the community or those who have already done it, so that we can possibly provide the platform so that they can share experiences. So yes, for us, I mean, of course, this is a recommendation that is adopted by governments, but inside there are recommendations at different levels.
Thanks, Anna. Irina, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on this issue of funding because it was mentioned a number of times, and I've never been in a discussion with a policymaker where a policymaker would say, I have the money that I want to spend on an open science policy. Usually it's a request to write a policy that wouldn't require too much money to implement it. And I think for us, it's actually an opportunity to really focus on building sustainable local infrastructures, because we don't need to fight for the same money with, for example, international publishers, because money are not there. So I think that's really a way to showcase the importance of institutional or national local infrastructures, and an opportunity to set them in a really cost-effective and sustainable way. So I would say that, like, for us, it's really a blessing that there are no additional money.
Thanks, Irina. Well, I guess it's time to wrap up. This was just a great session. Anna, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I want to also reiterate what Bianca said about the Latin American context. We are here to support you. We feel these recommendations are very, very good, and we hope that they will be able again to take us to the next level of advancing open science and advancing it in a more equitable manner than has been done in the past. So thank you so much again. There were a number of requests in the chat for your slides.
I'll share them with you, no problem.
Great, great. So if you could send me your slides and I'll share those with the COAR members, that would be wonderful. And if there's nothing further from anyone, just applause.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation and for all the inputs. And we'll be coming back to you because you really have a big role to play to help us with moving open science forward, and also with the recommendation, and also more broadly, you know, we really would like to continue working with you as much as possible.